Hello world, hello internet, hello X, and everybody who is interested a little bit into a deeper dive into Tucker Carlson recent interview of so-called Russian President Vladimir Putin. Now, before we get into the details, let me introduce myself. I was born in Russia. Well, I was born in USSR in end of 70s. I speak fluent Russian. I monitor political establishment and propaganda and everything that happens in Russia for good last 20 years. My family predominantly was born in Ukraine, and in the recent conflict and the war, some of my relatives were killed. My friends are being impacted, but I do still have family in Russia, so I am conflicted and very concerned with about the conflict on both sides of the front line, if we want to call it that way. I have most respect to Tucker for most of the interviews, and on most of the time I do enjoy and value his opinion about various topics he takes. And when it came to Russia and the entire topics of Ukraine, I cannot deny I'm very surprised by poor coverage from his side. Extremely poor coverage. Not detailed, not going into details good enough, deep enough, covering the entire story. He takes fragments and positions them in front without back-end story, without clarifying, taking things out of context. And on at least one occasion, he actually repeated Russian propaganda, where Russians took a speech of one of the American congressmen, cut it in pieces, and portrayed it Americans as bad or like evil, let's put it this way. And Tucker repeated that, which was horrible, right? He should have checked the source, because that was fake. So in that sense, I was concerned about the interview, but the bigger concern that I have for anybody covering and talking about Russia and its politics is how bad the Russian propaganda machine is. And right now, watching everything that happens for the past at least 25 years, and I run my channel for a long time. I read news articles, I look at the politicians, their actions and everything, and I know firsthand how bad it is from the personal life perspective, but at the same time I saw thousands of different stories where I know that information just doesn't align. It's not what happened in the real life. And one of the reasons why this is happening is Russia, as Soviet Russia, we're talking about 60 and 70 years ago, and before that, starting pretty much before World War II, was aggressively investing in propaganda and disinformation machine. Basically, it will invest in its radio station, news printing agencies, TV stations later on, which would work in every single country in the world, and portrayed certain targets as good or as bad, depending on the regime at the time, be that pro-Russian, pro-Soviet, pro-communist, pro-socialist, or against America, against democracy, against capitalism. So over the years, Russian propaganda or disinformation machine used various techniques. And if you ever heard word Zionist, for example, this is a result of that machine. That is the result. If somebody says something bad about Jews, something anti-Semitic, and uses in that phrase word Zionist, 99% by the way don't know what it actually means. It is the result of Russian Soviet propaganda machine. This is just one of the examples. And that machine still lives on. And what's funny enough, right now, the current Russians believe it. It's their own lie and they believe it. So when Tucker Carlson said, I'm going to interview Putin and listen to his opinion, I was very skeptical. So, in a nutshell, not to waste your time, the interview overall is garbage. Absolute garbage. Tucker, this is a personal note from somebody you don't know. You did absolutely horrible job. Not a single strong question. And even though like you had few basics like, hey, why did you invade the country? You never followed up to a proper, complete answer. You allowed Putin to talk history, unrelated history, fake history, whatever it is. So you did a horrible job. You have a nice exposure, you have lots of people listening to you, but overall, your interview sucked. Like, you should never ever do anything like that. Do your homework. You have a team, you have money, you can do research. Yeah, that was not journalism, that was not an interview. You just gave him a platform. You gave him a platform to talk through you back to Russians. Because when you were there in Russia, there was so much focus on you, like you were a messiah. Every newspaper, every radio station, every TV was talking about you, where you went, how much you spent in the store, what you ordered in a restaurant. Everything was about you. Why was that? Because they need to fill in the gaps in their own news networks, because exactly at that time they're denied pretty much the only opponent for the upcoming elections, right? There was one so-called Nadezhdin. He was potentially a decent candidate, potentially. I'm not saying he's the only hope for Russia and stopping the war, but he was somewhat not 100% associated with Putin. The three other candidates that actually got into the ballots, they are part of the Kremlin PR just to publicly demonstrate that there is more than just one name in a voting booth. That's it, nothing else. This one was actually an independent voice, and that voice was officially shut down. And your interview just came about the time like, hey, look at this. This is what's happening. We have a new messiah. We have something to talk about. Forget about the fact that our upcoming elections is 100% fraud. So thank you for that. Now, because you didn't answer any strong questions, you got random answers that don't actually talk about the situation in Ukraine or in the world. And from the perspective of Russian, I'll call them sheep for the sake of the argument, he actually portrayed it to everybody how cool he is, how knowledgeable he is, and how opinion of Putin is actually right. That's it. That's what you did. By you taking interview from Putin, you proved to Russians that Putin is actually in control of the situation, and he is great. Now, everything that Putin told you, 99% of that is a lie. Like, literally a lie. And debunking every line of his lie will take hours, days, months. Like, how poorly his lie was created, right? Like, just extremely poor, horrible. Wrong dates, wrong people, wrong directions, geographically, historically, factually, everything is fake. And 1% was taken out of context. Yeah, so that's that's the person you were talking to. Example of things that we're taking out of context is, for example, he mentioned the Nazi collaborator in Canadian Parliament that everybody was applauding to, and that did happen. That really happened. Trudeau is a horrible Prime Minister of Canada. Everybody knows that, and he did a very poor job bringing honorable guests, or he purposely was that stupid to bring horrible guests into the Parliament. And this is what we get for voting Liberals, Canadian Liberals. But that is taking out of the context. That's not supposed to be the main focus, because if you look at the history, through the entire human history, an enemy of my enemy is my friend. It always been the case, always been the case. And that particular case where we're talking about Ukrainians collaborating with Nazis against Russians in the beginning of World War II, it's absolutely true. It happened in a big scale. Why? Because 10 years ago, Russia did enormous famine, man-made famine in the history of the world. For those of you who don't know, Ukraine has extremely fertile soil, one of the best in the world. Right now, you know, there is a grain issues in the world because major supply of it comes from Ukraine. And there is issues because of the war, delivering and selling that grain, you name it. The reason is because Ukraine is extremely rich when it comes to grain and other produce. And back in the day, it was feeding itself and neighboring countries. And Russian, Moscow, you call it Communist Party, killed millions of people. They starved to death. They were eating their own family members. There's cases, multiple hundreds of cases of cannibalism, if not more. And yeah, you will remember that, and you'll find every way possible to punish that regime or disconnect from that regime at that time. And don't talk about knowledge about all the atrocities that Germany did at that time, because yeah, there was no internet. That information was not publicly available. So if somebody is fighting the Russians and Russians did you bad, extremely bad, yeah, you probably will fight against them. You joined forces with the Nazis. Many did, because yeah, Russians did horrible things to Ukrainians, to Baltics, Polish, and you name it. So Putin is a horrible person, absolutely horrible. Now, is this an actual president of Russia that was voted into power starting 2000, early 2000s? We actually don't know, because original Putin, the old one, the slim one, spoke perfect German, understood German, was giving lectures in German. This one cannot say a single word. The original Putin had problems with his hand. He couldn't lift it, had lots of issues with that. The current Putin suddenly uses that hand as if it's been fixed, even though the problem persisted for decades. So, original Putin supposedly died close to 20 years ago, and suddenly we saw that Putin, out of blue, forgot German, looked differently, spoke slightly differently, and in recent news, the current Putin died on October 26th or 25th, something like that. And this is heavily being pushed by opposition in Russia right now, because too many, like I cannot mention all the events and all the occasions where behavior of people who are very close to Putin, who know who the real Putin is changed. They talk about Putin in the past tense. They describe them. When there is a video shoots of a Putin in official setup where there is a picture of Putin on the wall, he's always positioned in the wrong angle, which these guys don't do. This is not a mistake. This is done on purpose. Nobody will allow such an atrocity to be committed on the primary news networks in the prime time. So there's small bits and pieces, and again, suddenly he regained full functionality of his hand, which was not the case. His watch shifted from one hand to another, even though he was using one hand for so many years. So all those little bits and pieces combined show us that we're talking to imposter. And analysis of his voice, facial recognition, mimics, everything shows us that this is a fake one. But anyways, whenever it's fake or not, and whenever this fake contradicts his own statements from 2 years ago, from a year ago, from 20 years ago, basically not a single thing that Putin ever said was true or stayed true, or whatever was promised was not broken with time. His interview and everything he tries to say and suggest is that West is a horrible place, that the West tricked him, that the West did this and the West did that. And yeah, he is powerless. He is blaming everybody but himself. He never did anything valuable for his country. He stole billions, if not trillions of dollars, and this is again a big speculation, but amount of oil and gas Russia stole over the years, and right now most of the population, we're talking about most of the population, lives in poverty, unbelievable poverty, considering the amount of resources they got, the amount of land, and pretty much good labor force. It cannot be calculated how much money actually was stolen, but the failure on the battlefield can suggest like just the military budget was gutted for billions and billions of dollars for the last 20 years. This is just one example that we're seeing live in front of us. That's the story. And just for you to get an idea, every politician, everybody who is somehow connected to Putin, who works close to him, these guys are billionaires, dollar billionaires. Everybody has kids learning or having properties overseas, living in castles, top biggest cities in the world, traveling in luxurious ways, owning yachts, personal jets, you name it. And this is almost everybody who has some kind of access to the high-ranking powers in Putin's circle. Let's call it this, circle. So they need to stay in power, because the moment they're not, they need to pay the bills, and they don't have the pocket to steal it from. So they're stealing it from the government budget, and everything over the years was built around their ability to steal from people of Russia. And the war is needed to keep this circle going, because during the military operation they can make up any rules, any laws they want, enforce them by police or by military force, and yeah, nobody can say much about it. And any other opposition that would try to come in place and take over the government will be faced with fixing the country after war, negotiating the solutions. And yeah, that will be very difficult job. So very few actual candidates went or attempted to go for the elections, and from all of that, the very last one was canceled on the day of your interview. So in that regard, you didn't ask tough, proper questions. What about all political prisoners of Russia? Through all the history talk that Putin went almost 800 years back, confusing dates and places, there was one thing that you had to mention. What happened to Budapest Memorandum, where Russia signed it and promised to protect the borders and the sovereignty of Ukraine. That was signed in 1991. This is what America signed, and America must support it as well and protect the borders of Ukraine. So, and that agreement Russia broke 3 times: when it annexed Crimea, when it started war in Donbass, and finally when it started this war in 2022. So 3 times Russia broke one agreement, and the whole talks about West not doing this, not doing that, and NATO was pushing forward, and we were forced to act the way we acted. Yeah, that's just a fable, just to fill in the time, to forget what the original question was. Nobody in the West ever attacked Russia, aside from Germany, and we know how aggressive Germany right now. Nobody ever attacked Russia for the last 80 years. Well, even before that. Russia didn't have to go into the First World War. So, if you look at the statistics, for the last 100 years, Russia was at peace and had 0 conflicts for the total of less than 3 years. Every single day, every hour, every night, every second, Russia either attacking somebody or helping somebody else to attack for the last 100 years, which is not true about most every single country in the world, including America's. America is not trying to attack. It does participate in certain events, but it is, for most part, is a reactive action, not a proactive action. Russia attacked aggressively all of its neighbors for the last 20 years. Not all, but most of the neighbors, and interfered with the political aspects of majority of them, trying every way possible to keep its previous satellites, the republics, under its control, under its rule. So yeah, your interview sucks. I don't want to waste too much time and breaking it down to every sentence which was unnecessary, either wrong or yeah, just waste of everybody's time. Please, next time, do your homework, ask around, and gather questions probably from opposition, because they would know perfectly what questions to ask, and they will have follow-up questions when the questions are not answered. You haven't asked what happened to close to 100 other people who were journalists in Russia and were asking really tough questions, and what happened to them. Yeah, that would be a nice question to ask, because 100 dead journalists is a big number for the last 20 years, and bunch of big names and billionaires dead all of a sudden. Also very important question. Hundreds of generals and military personnel. Yep, also dead. For a strange reason. Suddenly they forget how to walk, how to talk, how to take a bath, how to not lean from the balcony. They die like flies when there's something bad is happening in the world. So yeah, please do your research. Take it down, maybe, because yeah, zero value for the West to view Putin like, yeah, he's an idiot and he should be behind bars. But yeah, your interview didn't do any good, just wasted 200 million views, 2 hours each. Yeah, you impacted lots of people and reduced productivity for a small country economy, pretty much. That's it in a nutshell. Take care. Glory to Ukraine.